Hello, welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. For many years, I improvised a new bedtime story for my children every night, and now with their permission, I'm sharing the best of those stories with you. In this episode, we continue the story of Myra and the online school for adventuring. Myra has a new assignment for sneaker class, but she may find that it's rather more than she bargained for. I hope you enjoy the story. Not much happened for the first day or so after that strange class meeting of all the sneaker students. But then, about 2 days afterwards, Myra returned to the dorm to find Tweety whistling, which was a new thing. Myra had never heard Tweety whistle before. It sounded sort of like wind blowing down a canyon, and had sort of a mournful sound, but Tweety looked really happy, and Myra said, "What's up?" And Tweety said, "I have successfully done something good that I was not supposed to do." "And what's that?" asked Myra. "Well," said Tweety, "I was headed past the Stalker Llama Cave." "Yes," said Myra. "And I could tell that the leprechaun, Professor Fortune, wasn't in there." "And how could you tell that?" asked Myra. "Because," said Tweety, "I've been studying," and pulled a book out of Tweety's desk. Myra leaned over to look at it. It said, "How to Sneak and Hide with Magic Users." "Really?" said Myra. "And that works?" "There are some good tricks," said Tweety. "Some of them you can't really do if you're not a rockkin. But you might flip through it." "I absolutely will," said Myra. "Anyway, so what'd you do?" "So," said Tweety, "I snuck into the Stalker Llama Cavern, and I polished Professor Fortune's saddle. I could see my face in it." That's great," said Myra. "So what now?" "Now," said Tweety, "I'm going to write an essay about it." "Uh-huh," said Myra. "Actually," said Tweety, "it's going to be a pretty good essay, because not only did I do something clever and nice for the person who I annoyed in the first place, but I learned some essential new sneaker skills in the process." "That's great," said Myra. "I still can't think of anything." Tweety shrugged. "It'll come to you. In the meantime, here." Myra sat down with the How to Hide from Magic Users book. The next day, Myra got a rather mysterious note from Chelsea. It said, "Dear Myra, I have something special planned, and I need your help. Meet me at the tavern tonight at 6. And so Chelsea also said, "Also, dress up." And Myra thought this was very strange, and she went down to Chelsea's room to try to inquire, but Chelsea was not there, and Chelsea's roommate said that she didn't know where Chelsea was. And so Myra figured she didn't have anything else to do, and maybe this would be a good thing that she could get credit on, too. And so Myra went to the tavern that night, and when she arrived, she sat down at the table that Chelsea had mentioned in her note, and then was somewhat surprised when moments later Corin joined her.
Knew it!
Myra's eyes went wide, and Corin said, "Thank you so much for inviting me here. I never expected, you to ask me out on, a formal date." "Huh," said Myra. "So, I guess Chelsea's been practicing her forgeries." "What?" said Corin. "Nothing," said Myra. "It's so nice to see you. How have you been?" She glanced around the tavern and noticed Chelsea peeking in through one of the windows. Myra carefully narrowed her eyes just a little bit, enough that she knew that Chelsea saw. And then she had to admit what was really a very pleasant conversation and evening with Corin. all the while swearing to herself that she was going to strangle Chelsea for this. The worst part of it was that this was almost certainly not going to get her any credit for the project. And so she had a great time with Corin. They discussed what they'd been doing and what they were planning on doing on the break after graduation, which was now just a little more than a month away. And after that, she went back to her dorm and saw Tweety writing Tweety's paper. When Myra woke up the next morning, she was starting to get a little stressed. There were only 3 days left, and she had to not only think of something, but also pull it off and write a paper about it. She had finished Tweety's book on magic users and how to hide from them, and she noticed that it was due back at the library. "Hey, Tweety," Myra said. "What?" said Tweety. "Tweety," said Myra, knowing that when Tweety is deep into concentrating on writing a paper, you could really say just about anything and Tweety would not register it. "Are you done with this book? Do you need it for your paper?" No, I'm finished with it. I learned everything I needed to learn," said Tweety. "That's great," said Myra. "You want me to take it back for you? I'm going out for a walk. I need some ideas." "Sure," said Tweety. "That would be great, Myra." So Myra headed over to the library. And she went in and she returned the book. And while she was returning the book, for some reason, it just caught her eye, the sign over the desk. It said, "Online School Library Rules. No shouting. No removal of reserved books from the library. And no food or drink in the library." And for some reason, that just sort of jogged her memory that the librarian had said when Myra had met with her in their office that she had never had one of Cook's cinnamon rolls. And Myra thought, "I'm a genius. This is perfect. There's no food allowed in the library, so I'm going to have to sneak it in. And is there anything nicer in the world than letting someone taste one of Cook's cinnamon rolls for the first time? And it's going to use my sneaker abilities, and it'll make a really nice, heartwarming paper. I can get this done like right now if Cook will give me a cinnamon roll." And so she headed back to her dorm first because she figured she was going to need a bag to conceal the cinnamon roll in. And Tweety was just putting the finishing touches on Tweety's paper and looked up as Myra walked in. Tweety said, "You look happy." "Yeah," said Myra. "I've thought of something to do, and I didn't think I was going to." "That's great," said Tweety. "Are you going to tell me?" "It's genius," said Myra. "I'm going to give the librarian a cinnamon roll." Tweety looked at Myra blankly. "Why is that?" "Because," said Myra, leaning over Tweety, "when I was there a few weeks ago, the librarian mentioned she'd never had one of Cook's cinnamon rolls." "Uh-huh," said Tweety, "but why does that require—" "Because there's no food allowed in the library," said Myra. "Oh," said Tweety. "Yeah, sure, great." Myra was disappointed. Tweety was not nearly as impressed with her genius as she was. She sighed, picked up her bag, and headed off to the cafeteria. When she arrived, she was pleased to discover that she didn't even have to talk to Cook about getting a cinnamon roll because there was a fresh tray of them out on the buffet. So she cut 2, sat down and ate 1, and then carefully wrapped the other in a napkin, and then wrapped that in an oilcloth to keep it from smelling very strongly because she didn't want anybody sniffing out as she snuck this into the library. And then she put it into her bag and thought, said to herself, "This is going to be the easiest sneak I've ever pulled off." She contemplated whether maybe she ought to sneak in a different door in the library. But she thought that really...
Is she doing this at night?
No, this is the middle of the day. she thought that really, since it was the middle of the day and there was no reason for her to sneak into the library, she was just going to walk through the front door. She did sort of walk up to the front door and kind of look around to see if there were any, security personnel or any sort of contraband detectors in the library. She did think she saw some runes around the edges of the doors that she thought might be some kind of alarm for removing books, and wondered why those hadn't gone off when she had removed that dictionary from the library. And then she thought maybe it was nighttime, but anyway, it hardly mattered. She figured they were not designed to detect food coming into the library. And so she walked in the front door, half holding her breath, but nothing happened. She made her way through the library, back to the nondescript office door that she had remembered the librarian meeting with her in before. She tapped lightly on the door, and no one answered. She briefly considered breaking in to the librarian's office in order to leave a cinnamon roll, and she was just fishing into her pocket for her lockpicks when she heard the librarian's voice behind her say, "May I help you, student Myra?" Myra jumped a little bit. She was, over the year, getting harder and harder to sneak up on, and she had not heard the librarian coming at all. "Oh," she said, "I've brought you a present, but we should step into your office." "Okay, sure," said the librarian. And the librarian opened the office door and stepped in. Myra stepped in behind her and closed the door. She said, "So, I remembered our conversation, and I brought you this." And she laid out the package on the librarian's desk, and she unwrapped the oilskin cloth around the outside, and the aroma of warm cinnamon and sugar and dough filled the tiny office. Myra saw the librarian's nostrils flare and her eyes widen a little bit. "Now, student Myra," said the librarian, "you know we're not supposed to have food in the library." "Yes, I know," said Myra, "but this isn't really the library near the books. This is your office, and you said you'd never had one, and this is one of Cook's famous cinnamon rolls." And she unwrapped the napkin and handed the librarian a fork. She said, "You won't regret making an exception." The librarian said, "Well, I suppose one little bite couldn't hurt." And so she cut a bite with the fork, a dainty little piece, and she popped it into her mouth. And she went, "Mmm." And then her eyes widened, and there was a moment where Myra felt like there were two people standing there instead of the librarian. And then it was just a tall woman who was not the librarian, but who Myra was sure she had seen before. The woman looked at Myra and said, "Run." And that's where we're going to stop for tonight.
What?
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's show, but questions and commentary were supplied by my children. The theme music was written by Brandon Thompson, and our wonderful logo was designed by Silas Wendelin. If you're enjoying the show, please tell someone about it, and leave a review with your podcast provider. You can now subscribe to the show to get extra stories and longer chapters of Myra and the Online School that combine multiple segments into a longer episode. The show's website is storiesforwonderfulchildren.buzzsprout.com. Until next time, I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.